Nafissa Thompson-Spires writes about some issues with anthropology and various cultures. I discuss this and more on today's episode. Welcome back to another episode of Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I found in my travels. Today I want to talk about a short story, because it is Short Story Tuesday, that focuses on anthropology and the Black community. I am referring to A Conversation About Bread by Nafissa Thompson-Spires, which was published in 2018 in the short story collection Heads of the Colored People. For those who don't know, Nafissa Thompson-Spires is a Black American writer who has been getting their work published since 2018. This is the first thing that they got published. This is the only thing that they've gotten published, which is weird because this is really good. Like, this is a really good short story collection. And I stumbled across it from my local library. And don't forget to patronize your local library. They might have very intriguing short story collections. Yeah, it's pretty fascinating. And Nafissa is an interesting writer, focusing a lot on the Black experience in this. And again, as I said, I'm kind of surprised she hasn't written anything else besides appearing in an anthology here and there, because I would really like to see, either another short story collection or, more realistically, a novel, because I think she has a very interesting writing style and her work is pretty compelling. Hopefully, we see something from her in the future, but at the moment she's working as a professor at Cornell University, talking about television kind of studies and things like that, so focusing on pop culture. But yeah, without further ado, let's talk about A Conversation About Bread. I will do a summary, a little bit of analysis, and we will move on from there. So A Conversation About Bread focuses on Eldwin and Brian. They're both Black individuals. They are anthropology graduates at the University of California, Riverside. They're like the only two Black students in the anthropology program, and they've chosen to work with each other on a specific project of sort of creating like an anthropologic record of your fellow student, and they're working together on that, Eldwin wants to tell a story that Brian has told him before about bread, about how a student named Junior in high school brought bread to school, and specific types of bread, like very tasty, out of the ordinary kind of bread, gourmet bread essentially, and it sparked a fury in the students who wanted more of it. But as that student named Junior began to bring in more unusual types of bread, some of the students began to push back because it seemed a little too white for them, or, as Eldwin writes later, a little too gay, specifically. But Brian reads over what Eldwin has written, and he's worried that Eldwin is stereotyping people from Mississippi, stereotyping Black people, and specifically going into how anthropology tends to do that. And it should be noted, Brian lived in Los Angeles, moved to Mississippi, and now is back in Riverside after going to UCLA and having to leave because of a court case where he was being stalked and whatnot. Eldwin starts talking about how Brian is focusing too much on respectability and trying to portray the culture positively, when he's not accurately portraying what it truly is. Whether or not this is actually what Black culture is doesn't matter. This is what that specific school was doing. But Brian can't seem to move past it. It should also be noted that Brian has a disability. He's in a wheelchair. He can walk, but he has to use the wheelchair for a lot of work. He has like contusions in his legs, and people just stare at him pretty frequently for that. And then when he was at UCLA, he was stalked by a woman named Kim, who was an artist and developed an obsession with his disability. And Brian talks about like how there's a lot of disability fetishes out there, which Eldwin doesn't try to pursue, because he wants to respect the privacy that Brian has kind of set up here about that. But they do talk about that story through this short story. And then Eldwin finds himself struggling to rewrite this story, constantly changing some things, but in the last pass, we see that he's sort of added that not only was the bread kind of white people, like a gourmet bread club was kind of too white, but it was also kind of gay. And Eldwin is just like, that doesn't really sound right as well. And eventually they kind of come back and they discuss how Eldwin is going to write a different story from Brian's kind of past, because this one is a little too difficult to kind of parse. And they agree to do that, even though it doesn't really seem satisfactory for them. And as the story comes to a close, it's kind of indicated throughout the story, but there's another graduate student, a white graduate woman, watching them and writing things down. It's possible she's a anthropologist as well. That's what the story suggests, but it doesn't directly say it. So, their people are observing them as well. In terms of analysis, there is quite a bit to talk about with this story. It is really good. Many of the short stories in this collection are amazing. Again, Thompson-Spires is a really solid writer, and I think one of the things that she's talking about here is the idea of being under a microscope, being viewed in a cultural sense, because Thompson-Spires presents a story that touches upon issues with cultural studies, the things that aren't quite so good about it, that many people have criticized anthropology about for years, but have never fully been addressed in the anthropological field. And so it's a problem that arises when you tell stories about other cultures, especially if you're not from that culture. Margaret Mead went to the Pacific Islands and told stories about those groups of people, but she told a very narrow story that didn't provide a bigger picture, and it kind of guided people's understanding of those culture, even if that wasn't a realistic picture or a full picture, or didn't really highlight the complexities within that culture, because every culture is pretty complex. And so when Eldwin wants to write about Brian, like, Eldwin's telling a slice of Brian's story, which creates a number of problems, particularly with stereotyping. Brian is worried that Eldwin's writing might portray the people of Mississippi as sort of backwards, or he might portray the culture as, having bad aspects, that they do their own racism or something like that. Specifically, calling things like white people shit, or even saying that having a gourmet bread club is a little gay, because that doesn't make the Black community look that great. And those aspects might be present within the Black community, but portraying that story is like in that way kind of makes it exclusively seem like that is how the white community is, or sorry, the Black community is. So Brian is kind of worried about representation there, which I'll get to in a few moments. And then there's also the worrying about the white gaze, that a lot of anthropological studies, a lot of cultural studies are viewed by white people, and there's that worry that you have to act a certain way around white people and you can't be yourself. And so if you're writing this type of story, you're worried how are white people going to perceive it, how are those people in power going to perceive it, and how might they use it against you. And then there's the added effect that there's a graduate student kind of watching all of this, and Eldwin knows about it. So is Eldwin and Brian kind of having a specific discussion that for the kind of benefit of this white student? Like, do they know they're being watched? So how they're talking about this story is, affected by that. I guess that's another additional kind of layer to the story here, which I think Thompson-Spires does particularly well. And it's really impossible to kind of escape that feeling that you might be denigrating a culture. No matter how well you try to represent someone and how accurately you try to represent a group of people in a subculture, there's that worry that you might be doing something worse for those group of people. Allow me to read you an interesting quote from this. Eldwin felt the sketch sounded worse than before. He wasn't sure anymore why he wanted to tell this story in the first place, or if it was even possible to do ethnography without being a chem. Didn't every story provide a narrow representation at best and fetishize somebody at worst? Which I think is a good sort of statement, a good sort of passage there, getting about the worries that Eldwin is beginning to feel, especially after Brian tells him what happened with Kim in the story. Because Kim, was an artist who fetishized Brian's disability. And in some ways you might be fetishizing Black suffering or something like that, or the way that Black individuals are through ethnographies. Is that something that, like, is just plaguing the world of anthropology? I think Thompson-Spires might be kind of arguing that, and other anthropologists have argued it before. So it's really difficult to kind of do ethnographies, and again, you have to wonder, like, what is it all for? Is it being done for purely scientific, let's understand cultures better purposes, or is it being done to denigrate those cultures? Is it being done to show the superiority of white culture, which has been sometimes been the case in the past? There is that extra layer of the disability fetish, again, as I've mentioned before. And then there's the other student watching, showing that even though they're trying to avoid being under the microscope, being in the white gaze and things like that, they're still a part of that. Again, it does seem kind of impossible to avoid. And adding an even bigger layer to this is the fact that the reader is kind of part of the story here. Like, you and I are both kind of observing this discussion taking place, much like the grad student is. And, anything that I say in this video is kind of contributing to that kind of discussion. I'm very much aware of that. And that's probably Thompson-Spires, that's Nafissa's kind of aim in this story, is to get you to kind of ask that kind of question and see, is it truly possible to analyze a culture, or is that inherently, kind of misleading people about what that culture is? And then another aspect of the story is the idea of good representation. So everybody wants to represent their people particularly well, to be a good representative of that culture, but also when you're portraying that culture, to not make it seem like it's less than, or to kind of embarrass those people, because that's where you're from. And I feel like there's increased pressure for Eldwin and Brian to represent their culture well, their people well, the fellow Black people, but also the people from Mississippi. Not simply portraying them as backwards, but also being accurate, not hyping them up without good cause behind it, actually doing the assignment at hand here. And again, there's that question, is this truly possible in anthropology? I think that's the question at the center of this story. Is it possible to do good representation? And I think the answer might be no here, because either you're going to overhype a culture and be too clean with your sort of ethnography, or on the other hand, you're gonna make a lot of mistakes. You're going to oversimplify, and you might end up portraying it as certain aspects as negative, even though that you're kind of missing a lot of points with that. So there's a lot of issues with anthropology, is I think the central part of this story here. Ultimately, you're presenting only a slice rather than the system as a whole. I think Brian and Eldwin kind of get at that in this story, especially with the story of the bread, how everyone went gaga for bread, completely ignoring, the food desert kind of aspects of, how people might not get access to certain types of food, how some schools might have less resources, so having fancy bread, might seem particularly great, whereas in other schools it might just seem like a normal thing that happens, particularly with white, well-funded private schools. But you don't really see that with the slice of the story, because anthropology is not really meant to talk about systems. It's more meant to talk about people and talk about day-to-day or cultural kind of things, and you're kind of missing a large part of it. They briefly talk about the military-industrial complex in this story, and I think they're kind of getting at the point, but they're also missing it a little bit, because again, they're in the moment rather than looking at the wide scope of everything, which isn't the purpose of the assignment. And again, that might be a failing of anthropology there. It should also be noted that these are the only 2 black students in this UC Riverside anthropology program. So there's a desire to be the good representatives of to succeed in this program and show that it can be done, because otherwise, the people in charge of the program might be like, well, we tried to admit 2 black students or 2 people from a minority group in the past and it didn't work out. Maybe that's just not meant to be. And then, if you're not doing great there, if you're not doing effective work, then that's hurting the culture. But it shouldn't be Eldwin and Brian's sort of responsibility to do well for the culture. But again, like there's so many different sort of problems going on in this story, and that I have to give Thompson-Spires kind of credit for presenting a lot with actually not that much, because it's really just a conversation in this story. But she introduces a lot of interesting ideas, and you could create something even bigger from this story, an entire anthropology kind of thesis or something like that, or even just a longer story. I would love to have seen that as well. But there's a lot worth talking about there, which I'll kind of leave up to you to mention in the comments, or even just sort of discover the story on your own and talk about it in a different way. Anyway, those are my thoughts on A Conversation About Bread by Nafissa Thompson-Spires. Pretty solid short story, was very high quality, one of the best that I've read for this channel. And I'm honestly surprised I was able to find this in my local library. I wasn't expecting something like this, because some of the short stories feel very different, and then you get near the end of the book and you stumble across this one, which honestly feels more like a discussion than anything else, but every short story is different. So I highly recommend that you seek out this book, especially this short story, if you're able to find it. If you are, let me know what your thoughts are on my review or on the story in the comments below. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that more people can find out about this short story or this author. Join the Discord, which there is a link to in the description if you want to have further conversations about, books, movies, that sort of thing, various media. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and bread-related travels. Farewell.